Luis Elizondo's book, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, has published as of 20 August. Elizondo has been one of the key figures. Really, he's moved the needle on UFOs and UAPs. It looks like it wasn't really taken seriously in the news. I didn't really take it seriously until David Fravor came out. That's what really changed my mind. I was an F-16 pilot for 18 years, didn't see anything while in the cockpit. No one ever talked about UFOs. And when I saw David Fravor give his in-depth encounter with the Tic Tac, it really just changed my mind and kind of blew open my worldview. I had epistemological shock or ontological shock, however you want to call it. David Fravor put a big crack in the wall, and then Elizondo knocked the wall down, and he came out and said these amazing statements. He's been supported from the beginning by Chris Mellon, who is the other individual I think who's had the most impact on the UAP discussion, at least in the United States. And so he wrote this foreword for Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. And the foreword is amazing. If you don't want to hear my commentary, you can read the foreword in the sample just on Amazon. You can find it online. You don't have to buy the book. I know people were mad. I gave some info about the leak. But I really think you encourage people to actually buy the book, and any publicity usually is good publicity. But Chris Mellon, he has such a way with words. He is eloquent. That's really his power and strength, is how eloquent he is based on his experience. So let's go through the foreword. Thanks for being here. Chris Lado, welcome to Lado Files. There's a debate among historians regarding something they call the great man theory of history. According to this perspective, history can largely be explained by the impact of courageous and inspired individuals who challenge the status quo, leading to irreversible changes that forever alter the course of human affairs. I leave it to the reader to assess for themselves whether Luis Elizondo is one of those people. I think I already said in the intro, Luis Elizondo is one of those people. He's definitely moved the needle, changed the discussion, at least about UAPs in the U.S. We finally have Congress actually talking about it. Mellon continues, at a minimum, I could say without fear of contradiction that Lou has played a central and indispensable role in forever changing the way humanity views the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Indeed, revelations regarding the UAP issue may soon cause humanity to reframe its view of itself and our place in the cosmos. I know Luis Elizondo has said this a lot. He's talked about humility. Once we find out the true nature of UAP, it will change, I guess, how humanity actually looks at itself. It will reframe its view of itself. Mellon continues, this incredible true story will, among other things, explain how the UAP issue was recently transformed from a scurrilous tabloid newspaper topic to a valid and important national security issue. Hopefully it has moved from tabloid to important national security issue, but that remains to be seen. There's still a battle going on. Mellon continues, to fully appreciate the impact Lou and some of his colleagues have had on our understanding of UAP, you need to first understand the situation that existed at the time Lou began his journey. When I first met Lou at a closed-door Pentagon meeting early in 2017, the UAP issue was still regarded with unremitting contempt and disdain by the mainstream press, the scientific community, and the U.S. government. So everyone basically disdained towards this topic. This was nothing new. The UAP issue had been mired in a quagmire of controversy, wheels futilely spinning, accusations flying since the 1940s. Admittedly, it didn't help that a parade of UAP charlatans and frauds were seeking to exploit the issue for fame and money. No matter, from 1970, when the U.S. Air Force abandoned Project Blue Book, its public relations effort to investigate and discredit UAP reports, until late in 2017, when Lou resigned his position on the staff of the Secretary of Defense, there was no meaningful change in either the stated position of the U.S. government or in public perceptions of the UAP topic. So that is a long time, right? From 1970 to 2017, almost 50 years, nothing changed. Basically, the UAP topic was bottled up, wheels futilely spinning. Mellon continues, true, sensational press reports of UAP activity would occasionally surface. There were also some ineffectual efforts to engage Congress and even a significant but short-lived congressional earmark for UAP research. But there was no meaningful progress in recognizing the validity of the UAP issue from 1970 through 2017. Bob Salas, Robert Hastings, and his group of nuclear whistleblowers have been going to D.C. for decades, right? I think over 25 years. They've been going every 5 years and still have not been able to really make a mark. Mellon continues, indeed, the UAP stigma was still so bad in 2017 that most commercial and military personnel were afraid to report their observations for fear of damaging their careers and reputations. As a retired F-16 pilot, I can completely agree with this. If I was alone, maybe even with another wingman, and I saw a UAP, chances are I would not have reported it, right? I might bring it up and talk in confidence with one of my leaders, but no way they're going to forward it up the chain of command, make a big stink of it, right? You're not going to say the F word in front of grandma, basically. You're not going to put your own career and reputation at risk. That's why David Fravor, he was a commander. I think that's why he was able to speak up about it, because he had the reputation. He already had the career. Making commander of a operational fighter squadron, that is the goal of pretty much every fighter pilot's career. Maybe there are a few that want to be generals, etc. But getting to be a squadron commander is kind of the pinnacle. Even generals say their best job was being a squadron commander. So he was already at the pinnacle of his career, and his reputation was extremely high as a Top Gun graduate and as a fighter squadron commander. He has the reputation, and that's why he could actually speak about it. Plus, there were 3 other people there watching it with him. Mellon continues, similarly, most civilian witnesses were reluctant to discuss their experiences with friends and family, much less file an official UAP sighting report. And this is completely true as well. Hear this all the time from experiencers. They can't talk to their family. Their family wouldn't listen at all. Everyone thinks they're crazy, so you can't talk to friends or family, much less file an official UAP sighting report. Are there even good avenues to file a UAP sighting report? FAA pilots, commercial pilots, cannot file a UAP sighting report pretty much anywhere. In Europe, doesn't matter. US, you can't really file. They say, yes, you could, but there's no actual dedicated UAP sighting report process. Aero was supposed to create that, but still nothing in FAA. Americans for Safe Aerospace, Ryan Graves' project, is trying to push that through Congress now to make it basically a requirement that FAA has to allow pilots to report without retribution, but we'll see if that goes through. Mellon continues, meanwhile, the handful of people at the Department of Defense who had a serious interest in the issue were careful to conceal it from any but a few trusted friends. Prior to 2017, when DoD personnel discussed UAP, it was usually behind closed doors or in whispers. So Mellon was a high-ranking department official, Assistant Secretary of Defense. He says the handful of people at the Department of Defense who had a serious interest in the issue were careful to conceal it. So just a handful, but there were some people. But again, due to the stigma, they're keeping it quiet. He continues, this climate of hostility toward the UAP issue was a direct result of U.S. government policies formulated by the CIA's Robertson panel in 1953. Claiming to fear U.S. air defense communications might be overwhelmed by UAP reports, the CIA panel advised the Air Force to enlist the Walt Disney Company and the mass media in a campaign to debunk UAP. A subsequent Air Force-funded UAP study at the University of Colorado went further, declaring the topic devoid of scientific merit. Chaired by physicist Edward Condon, it went so far as to recommend that academic institutions ensure students could not receive academic credit for studying the UAP issue. Dr. Condon's report provided the Air Force the excuse it sought to close Project Blue Book, its controversial UFO investigation. As time passed, Air Force contempt and hostility for the UAP issue became more explicit. By 1970, despite thousands of credible, unexplained UAP reports, the Air Force disingenuously took the position that UAP were simply the result of a mild form of hysteria, individuals who fabricate reports to perpetuate a hoax or seek publicity, psychopathological persons, and misidentification of natural objects. In other words, according to the U.S. Air Force, anyone reporting a UAP was either crazy, a fraud, or a fool. I've covered this several times on the channel. The Robertson panel, Project Blue Book, it's been recorded. It's documented. The CIA basically told the Air Force and the government to debunk any claims about UAPs. Project Blue Book, which had hundreds of files in it, actual well-documented cases, and a lot of them unknowns, were totally disregarded. And again, anyone who thought this was true or could be possible was crazy, a fraud, or a fool. Mellon continues, for decades thereafter, notwithstanding the testimony of many U.S. military veterans and documentation unearthed by UAP researchers confirming UAP intrusions into the heavily restricted airspace surrounding U.S. nuclear weapons facilities, the Air Force continued to staunchly maintain that no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the U.S. Air Force has ever given any indication of a threat to national security. So this is just an amazing comment to me. How is that possible? I mean, if you look, Rendlesham, Colonel Halt talked about actual beams of light coming from UAP into a nuclear weapon storage area. You have firsthand accounts from people like Mario Woods saying that this giant, amazing UAP craft spaceship essentially showed up and moved their truck, essentially kidnapped or abducted him, however you want to look at it. And yet that's somehow not a threat to national security, which is just amazing. Mellon continues, it was not enough for the Air Force to merely deny a threat. The Air Force even claimed there was no indication of technology beyond the range of present-day knowledge, which is just amazing, right? No indication. If you actually look in Project Blue Book, there is many indications that they had beyond the range of present-day knowledge. They even had a major on the panel saying that he thought it was extraterrestrial. He was silenced, obviously. Mellon continues, these were the formal positions of the U.S. government in 1970, and they remain the positions of the U.S. government in 2017, nearly a half century later, when I first met Lou. In short, we faced a prevailing establishment mindset that associated the UAP issue with irrational beliefs in subjects like poltergeists or astrology. And that's it. With the UAP issue, they can just relate it with taboo subjects such as poltergeists or astrology. But actually researching the UAP topic, that is the woo, right? Leslie Kean's Surviving Death talks about ghosts after death. What happens? If we look at actually faster than light travel, if you actually have faster than light travel, if everything actually is connected in the universe, why they keep saying we're all one, right? That everything is connected. And if you look mathematically, it does make sense. Gravity, or the force of gravity, has no distance limit. So even planets like Mars, it's proven that Mars actually has an effect on Earth and the actual undersea parts of Earth, the plate tectonics that was shown. So Mars actually affects Earth. We know the moon affects Earth. Obviously, the sun's gravity affects Earth. So the question is, could astrology actually even have some semblance of physical reality? Could it be shown in physics that we are linked? If we are linked to faraway star systems, then even if it's some small manner, maybe astrology could be based in some sort of reality, some sort of truth. Mellon continues, in 2017, at the time we met, I was an unpaid consultant for the Office of Naval Intelligence, hoping to still contribute in some way after retiring from full-time work on national security issues in the Pentagon and Congress. Thought this was interesting. He's a volunteer, unpaid consultant for O&I. A mutual friend from the CIA, Jim Semivan, brought Lou to my attention. And this is one of the issues and one of the main arguments against Lou and his group of people is that it seems to be kind of the same circle. That's what Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick said as well. It always leads to the same people. And this you have Chris Mellon saying his mutual friend from the CIA, Jim Semivan, brought Lou together. After finally overcoming the baffling and inefficient security procedures that bedevil anyone working intelligence issues for Uncle Sam, we are finally able to meet in Lou's Pentagon office. Yeah, I can completely support that statement. Security is a huge limfac. It's limiting. Everyone complains about it at all the high levels. Obviously, you need it. If you give away key information to the adversary, to the enemy, you're shooting yourself in the foot. But you also need to share the information, and that's what people complain about, is they're unable to share information with other equally qualified people that have a top secret clearance. They probably have a need to know, yet it's still going through all those wickets is difficult. He continues, it was an extraordinary meeting. Lou is heavily muscled, intense, energetic, charismatic, and effusive. He sports bold, colorful tattoos on his arms and carries himself more like a wrestler than a bureaucrat. He evinces a determination and intensity more often encountered in the ranks of combat units than in the civilian bureaucracy. He was wearing a variety of security badges and IDs on a chain around his neck, each a small totem of access and power in the national security kingdom. He has a natural gift for verbal communication that quickly became apparent. What I learned as the meeting progressed was both astonishing and outrageous. Astonishing because Lou presented incontrovertible evidence that strange, unidentified aircraft were routinely violating sensitive U.S. military airspace. So Mellon says right here that Lou showed him incontrovertible evidence that strange unidentified aircraft were routinely violating sensitive U.S. military airspace. So I think that's an amazing statement. Obviously, we can't see all of this information, right? Because it is classified. But according to people that have seen it, it is incontrovertible evidence. Mellon continues, these bizarre, silent craft lacked any discernible markings or means of propulsion. We both knew these were not experimental U.S. aircraft. Based on messages from the fleet and our own extensive contacts and access to the world of classified special access programs, SAPs. So that's been a main argument as well, is that these are obviously U.S. special projects, right? These are special access programs that the sailors out on the Nimitz, they did not have access to the program, so that's why they didn't know about them. But the Tic Tac, even the East Coast events, could be special access U.S. programs, right? That's the argument. But Chris says right here that we knew that they're not, based on our own extensive contacts and access to the world of classified SAP. So there are processes to confirm that these are not SAP U.S. programs. And according to Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo, they checked and they weren't. Consequently, there seem to be three primary possibilities. A potential U.S. adversary, most likely Russia or China, had achieved a major technological breakthrough that might tip the global balance of power against America and the free world. Number two, we had visitors from an alien civilization who were keenly interested in U.S. military capabilities. Or three, quite possibly UAP were a combination of mysterious terrestrial and non-terrestrial craft. So those are the three options that Chris Mellon presents here. So a potential U.S. adversary, I think this is the one that Congress talks about. What are these drones overflying all of our bases? What are these strange aircraft, call them that, entering our restricted areas? They're probably Russia or China drones, right? But unfortunately, like the Tic Tac, had amazing capabilities that were way, way above what our F-18s could do. And that should mean they were way, way above what our adversaries could do. In 2004 as well, I was a specialist on Russian and Chinese enemy electronic attack systems. And I can say that, yeah, they didn't have anything that could do like Tic Tac-like qualities. I was an expert on Russian and Chinese systems in 2008. So it's 4 years after the Nimitz. They couldn't do that. He says, number two, we had visitors from an alien civilization who were keenly interested in U.S. military capability. So ET civilization that basically is doing operational intelligence, right? Trying to figure out what are U.S. military capabilities. That's why they're at the nuclear sites. That's why they're following around our nuclear carriers, nuclear submarines, etc. Or three, quite possibly UAP were a combination of mysterious terrestrial and non-terrestrial craft. So they say it's both. You know, could it be U.S. adversary combined with alien civilization? But really, those are kind of their two options, right? Given what we knew about Russian and Chinese capabilities and the locations and nature of some of these intrusions, the ET hypothesis actually seemed the most viable explanation for some cases. Like I just mentioned there, like Tic Tac, it just doesn't make sense that it's an enemy system. Doesn't make sense. It's one of our systems. Like you said, they checked. And why would you have tests in a known area where you're doing operations? You're just going to do tests not out over the ocean where anyone can see, such as Russia and China. You're going to do your tests inland, right? At these test sites, these expansive test sites that we have near Edwards Air Force Base, out in the desert, out in Nevada. That's why we have hundreds and thousands of square miles separated out. You're not going to go over the ocean where anyone can just go there and listen and watch. This was clearly true for a series of encounters involving the Nimitz carrier strike group in November 2004. Yes, at the time, the USS Princeton, an Aegis-class guided missile cruiser escorting the mighty aircraft carrier the USS Nimitz, detected a large number of maneuvering objects that appeared to be descending from low Earth orbit. They were dropping vertically from extreme altitudes at fantastic speeds to around 20,000 feet, hovering briefly, then instantaneously accelerating, sometimes to extreme speeds. According to Kevin Day, Gary Voorhees, they were actually seen on the anti-ballistic missile radar system, right above 80,000 feet. Supposedly they saw many objects, dozens of objects. And then they would track them with their Aegis radar. Aegis has this vertical radar that it can use, right? So they could also see up to 80,000 feet, I think, looking for missiles, right? Inbound missiles coming from outer space, essentially, ICBMs, or high-altitude missiles, anyway, anti-ship missiles. And so they tracked it from space. So the anti-ballistic missile defense system tracked it into the actual Aegis system, tracking it down to 20,000 feet, down to the surface in miraculous speeds, right? Basically as fast as light. Mellon continues. After several days of observation, 2 U.S. Navy F-18s from the Nimitz managed to intercept one of these strange craft at close quarters in conditions of perfect visibility. For Navy Commander David Fravor, the 48-foot-long, wingless white craft he observed from the cockpit of his F-18 was so radical in behavior and appearance, so vastly more capable than any known aircraft, it seemed clear to this high-ranking officer and his fellow pilots that it was, quote, not from this world. Yeah, I totally agree. He had the career already in the bag. His reputation was solid. He had 3 other people there, and it was a Top Gun graduate, so he was an expert in at least all of our U.S. systems and many foreign systems as well. He continues. Before the day was over, this amazing, noiseless, almost egg-shaped vehicle was seen by 6 naval aviators, tracked by multiple radars on multiple platforms, and videotaped by an advanced military infrared targeting system. During these encounters, the object did things heretofore deemed impossible for any aircraft, demonstrating unprecedented speeds and maneuverability and surviving forces that would destroy many times over any aircraft or missile made by man. To date, nobody has been able to offer a credible, conventional explanation for these astonishing events. And that's so true, right? Arrow has come out so many times. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick Pants has said so many times that there's no evidence of extraterrestrial technology, right? But they don't mention, he never mentions, not once, Nimitz. He doesn't mention gimbal. He goes with the Mick West argument that it's just a glare, right? It's a glare on the cockpit. It's a glare on the sensor, right? But that glare represents something. There's something that's causing the glare. And as well as Nimitz, again, Mick West has no comebacks for Nimitz. There's just no answer. And actually in the book, and we know they investigated, right? Look at this. Mellon says right here, Lou not only briefed me on this case and showed me an official report, he later arranged for me to participate in official debriefings with Commander Fravor, Lieutenant Dietrich, and other Navy personnel who had seen UAP up close or on a military sensor system. So there was an official report. They did actually investigate it, at least AATIP did. And yet we hear nothing, right? And no evidence of extraterrestrial technology. The Tic Tac is evidence of extraterrestrial technology. Like witness testimony is evidence in a court. And they don't just have witness testimony. They also have radar. They have targeting pod video. Like, what else do you need? He continues, any lingering doubts about the legitimacy of the UAP topic quickly evaporated. It is one thing to read about a UAP incident, it's quite another to hear about it firsthand from U.S. military personnel whose training, integrity, and reliability make them ideal witnesses. These individuals had no incentive to report these incidents. Indeed, they had a strong incentive not to report what they saw for fear of damaging their prospects for promotion. In light of this, and their exemplary skills and patriotism, it would have been grossly irresponsible to disregard their accounts. Again, they have no answer for Nimitz. Zero. And they've released no information about it. Nothing. They're pretending like it's a U.S. system somehow, and they're just not releasing the information. But everyone on the inside says, no, they're saying it's not a U.S. system. So what about the Nimitz? That should be our only argument back to Arrow. Like, we don't care about your other things. What about Nimitz? What about Bob Solis and the nuclear incidents? Like, that's all we need to focus on. And add gimbal in there as well, just because that's going on, it seems like, daily. Mellon continues. As Lou described these military encounters and showed me authentic military gum camera UAP videos, I sometimes felt as though I were having an out-of-body experience. Even though I had studied the UAP issue extensively as a private citizen, seeing this compelling official evidence at a secret Pentagon meeting was an almost surreal experience. At times, I felt as though I were a character in a Hollywood sci-fi movie. He probably will be. I had long been intrigued by the UAP issue, but prior to this meeting, UAP were an abstract concept. Now, very suddenly, the issue was becoming both concrete and profoundly concerning. At times, I struggled to focus. While Lou presented the UAP data he had accumulated over many years, my mind was churning, trying to recalculate and repair its suddenly altered map of reality. Could one or more intelligent species from another solar system had found us? If so, why would aliens be so acutely and persistently interested in U.S. military capabilities? Was it merely curiosity regarding our most advanced technologies? Was it to gauge any potential threats they might encounter while operating in Earth's atmosphere? Or was something more sinister occurring? Or are these devices collecting intelligence on U.S. military forces in support of some sinister plan? What could we do to determine the capabilities of these vehicles and the intentions of whoever was operating them? How could we overcome the bureaucratic hostility that was preventing this information from reaching senior policymakers in the executive and legislative branches of government? These are great questions. Chris Mellon relates it in a few sentences here to Pearl Harbor, because it just seems very strange that there's so many accounts, there's so much evidence, and yet the government will not engage. And that is the opposite. They just deny. This cannot be possible. Obviously, you people are crazy, frauds, insane. Chris continues, the more I pondered this information Lou was presenting, the more my fascination and amazement turned to outrage and anger. Yes, after all, I'd spent the better part of my adult life engaged in intelligence oversight. Yet the information Lou was presenting made it clear the intelligence community was once again failing to incorporate lessons it should have learned from a number of prior tragic disasters. This was, to my mind, a blatant failure of intellectual integrity in the face of clear evidence America was at risk from a new capability being deployed by one or more unknown actors. Yet aside from Lou and a handful of his colleagues, nobody in the government seemed to care. I could say I was extremely angry as well. After serving 20 plus years in the U.S. Air Force, can honestly say that felt lied to. I think if we find out this is actually the underlying truth, I mean, every American in the world, every person in the world really has been lied to their face about this topic, at least kept in the dark, and seems just very suspicious. Where is all the information, especially on the Nimitz? Chris continues, as the reader may know, it is not unusual for Russian Bear bombers to occasionally fly across the Bering Strait toward Alaska, prompting U.S. fighter aircraft on strip alert to launch and intercept them in international airspace. The moment these lumbering Russian aircraft are detected, intelligence reporting mechanisms are immediately activated to ensure that America's military and civilian leadership is promptly notified. These Bear bomber intrusions are typically also reported in the press. By contrast, off our East Coast, America was suffering recurring violations of restricted U.S. airspace, week after week, month after month, without any formal intelligence reporting or press coverage. In fact, I was shocked to learn that the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, responsible for guarding North American airspace, was not even notified of these intrusions. Whether it was Russia, China, or someone else, this was clearly unacceptable. I saw this many times in my career where you have some safety issue, some other issue that seems obvious, but it is no one wants to take it seriously, right? It's so much easier just to look the other way. One example is just mental health for fighter pilots, right? As a fighter pilot, I would never go to the actual mental health to get mental help. Why? Because it will immediately impact my flying clearance. And it takes so long, so many years, so much luck really to get your flying clearance and to maintain it that pilots will do almost anything to not give it up. And saying that you need mental health, right? That the pilot has a problem with his mental health is a surefire way to get taken off flying status. So people are just going to look the other way, right? You're not going to worry about it. If no one's dying, nothing's blowing up, then maybe it's not that big an issue. And so they easily look the other way. Chris continues, it quickly became clear that when it came to UAP, the mighty U.S. intelligence apparatus was paralyzed and ineffectual. I could not help but be reminded of the fabled story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Only in this instance, instead of the rank and file pretending to admire clothing that did not exist, some defense and intelligence personnel were pretending not to notice advanced aircraft that plainly did exist. In fact, encounters with these craft were becoming so commonplace, one military airbase began posting warnings of the potential for mid-air collisions in an area that should have been devoid of any non-U.S. military aircraft. This is in the warning areas off the East Coast. So in those areas, they should be totally clear of aircraft, right? It's off the East Coast. You're not having transiting civilians going through there. So it's not a MOA, right? Civilians can fly through MOAs, which can also be dangerous. But warning areas now where you're actually shooting things, where you have missiles flying around, those, they keep the people completely out. So there should be no one in these areas where they're seeing these UAPs off the East Coast. As a career intelligence professional, I was keenly aware of the tragic losses associated with past intelligence failures. On December 7, 1941, a young lieutenant operating a radar battery in Hawaii detected incoming Japanese warplanes, but failed to alert his superiors. Blithely assuming the incoming aircraft detected by the radar he was operating were probably just U.S. aircraft returning from a training mission. As we all know, disaster ensued. Like I said, it's much easier just to look the other way. Nothing ever happens on my shift, right? I'm not going to point out some issue. I'm not going to turn someone in for safety issues. I'm not going to call a spade a spade. In a debrief, fighter debrief, this has always come up. It's difficult to put up your hand and say, you messed up, you made a mistake. And it's difficult to call out something that, doesn't exist, shouldn't be there. Continues. On September 11, 2001, America suffered the loss of thousands of lives that might have been spared if the CIA and FBI had only been willing to share information. I was in the Pentagon when American Airlines Flight 77 struck the building, so that failure was burned into my memory. Not only were thousands of lives lost on September 11, 2001, but thousands of U.S. military personnel later died, along with tens or hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, because this tragedy was exploited to justify an entirely unnecessary invasion of Iraq that could have been averted if the U.S. intelligence community had correctly discerned that Saddam Hussein did not have a viable weapons of mass destruction program. Okay, obviously, looking back, this was a huge oversight, right? A huge misstep, which is also interesting because Osama bin Laden and his whole team of terrorists were from Saudi Arabia. So why we attacked Iraq and Afghanistan? I mean, think about that. He continues, compounding these miserable and costly failures, the intelligence community then failed to warn policymakers that no reasonable amount of U.S. military force could succeed in pacifying Afghanistan. Yes, no shit. Afghanistan is literally called the graveyard of empires. And what did they do? They lured the main empire into the graveyard. He continues, much less converted to a nation championing conventional American values and beliefs. One might have thought we'd have learned a lesson about the limits of conventional military power against insurgents in Vietnam, Iraq, or failing that, have noticed what happened to the British and later the Soviet Union when they invaded Afghanistan. Yep, you can also put the French in there. I'm sure there's many other countries who have invaded Afghanistan and it did not work out. Why it's called graveyard of empires. I think that goes back thousands of years. Chris continues, I vividly recall calling my beloved uncle, James Mellon, who had spent considerable time hunting in remote regions of Afghanistan, the day the Soviets invaded that war-racked tribal country. When I asked whether he thought the impoverished Afghan people stood a chance against the mighty Soviet army, he replied immediately and without hesitation, the Soviets will never defeat these people. This should have been evident to anyone who knew that wild and mountainous country, and had studied its history. Yes, of course. It's called the graveyard of empires. Why do we think we'd succeed where the Soviets, the British, and every other nation that tried to dominate Afghanistan had failed? Why did they all go in there when they all knew the same thing? The philosopher George Santayana might as well have been speaking of Uncle Sam when he penned his oft-quoted phrase, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Yes. These disasters demonstrate a shockingly poor record of performance for the world's most generously funded intelligence community. What I was learning from Lou was frighteningly reminiscent of these prior disasters. Once again, like Pearl Harbor, unidentified aircraft were being detected. In this case, not once, but repeatedly, month after month, for years. Yet no warning was being passed up the chain of command. There was a total failure to disseminate this vital information to senior officials or even the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Because it can't happen, right? Can't be possible. UFOs don't exist. Aliens don't exist. Never mind, there's trillions of other planets, trillions of other star systems. We know you can't go faster than light. So obviously, they can't be here. It's not true. You're crazy. He continues, further, as was the case with Al-Qaeda attack of September 11, 2001, it was obvious that multiple agencies and departments had significant UAP information they were not sharing. For example, U.S. Navy aviators were routinely encountering UAP off the East Coast in designated military training areas. However, U.S. Air Force F-22s with even more powerful sensors were using the same training areas. They had to be detecting these strange craft as well. That is quite interesting. Why aren't the F-22s either detecting and reporting? So if they have the same radars, and F-22s, they were the first to have the active electronically scanned array radar in a fighter, right? They had the amazing fighter radar, and then that technology was later on trickled down to F-16s, F-18s, etc. So the F-18s on the East Coast, they track these new UAPs. F-22s have had those radars for years, so why aren't they seeing it? Are they seeing these things, and then they're just not reporting it? Chris says here, it was clear that the Air Force pilots were either afraid to report what they were saying, or the Air Force was refusing to share their reports. A third point would be, are they not seeing them? Chris says here, no, they're obviously seeing them. He continues, meanwhile, the National Reconnaissance Office, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency also appeared to have important UAP data they were not sharing. That's a lot of agencies, right? I think there's 18 intelligence agencies. Chris names several here and says that they each had important UAP data they weren't sharing. He continues, this seemed a clear echo of the problem that had proven so costly on September 11, 2001, when the intelligence community failed to prevent the deadly terrorist attack that destroyed the World Trade Center. Lou and I were both determined to do whatever we could to prevent another disastrous intelligence failure. In addition to the evidence Lou presented regarding recurring military encounters with UAP, Lou also made me aware of an investigation into the UAP issue that had been undertaken by an aerospace contractor using $22 million in DoD funds earmarked for UAP analysis by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid in 2008. I've covered this on the channel many times. This is what got AATIP stood up and AATIP as well. $22 million is not that much, but it's still $22 million. He continues, for my purposes, the most notable and useful information developed by the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Application Program, AATIP, was their thorough report on the Nimitz case. So he says right there, they did a thorough report investigation on Nimitz. Unfortunately, despite being the result of a good faith effort by the powerful Senate Majority Leader, the Honorable Harry Reid, the U.S. Air Force, and most components of the U.S. intelligence community refused to support this congressionally funded UAP investigation. Of course, because it can't be possible. It's not true. It doesn't exist. Indeed, the Defense Department worked to kill this short-lived program at its earliest opportunity. By the time we met, what remained of Senator Reid's inspired effort was a successor initiative Lou called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP. Lou and his colleagues were doing all they could to address this issue, but he lacked a high-level advocate from within or outside the program. For the intelligence community to function effectively, its leaders need to leverage rigorous analytical processes and be willing to speak unwelcome truths to those in power. Yet aside from Lou's group, this was clearly not happening with regard to UAP. Nobody in the intelligence community was even reporting these incidents, much less conducting an investigation into their origin, intent, or technology. As has happened too often before in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, it seemed far too many people were willing to quietly go along to get along, rather than challenging the status quo. Thankfully, Lou was willing to not only confront the system, but ultimately even fall on his sword and resign in protest. I saw this in the Air Force as well, right? As coming up the ranks, they don't want people that make a stink, right? You don't want people that ask questions like, why are we doing this, sir? That's never a good question. They want people that follow orders, get the job done, understand what their leaders want, and make it happen. But what happened is, as I got higher up the command, what I realized at the higher levels of command, you actually need the opposite, right? You need people that are able to think for themselves, to stand for issues that would normally float by, right? To actually put their hand up and say, hey, that's an issue. You need the leaders to do that, to actually be the innovative thinkers, the people that will raise a stink when something's going on. The problem is they've been trained their whole career to just follow orders, go along to get along, as Chris Mellon states here, rather than being an innovative thinker. So naturally, as a veteran of the Defense Department myself, my first instinct was to work through the chain of command. It seemed a long shot, but I thought I might be able to help Lou break through the suffocating DoD bureaucracy by getting him an audience with the Secretary of Defense. Under normal circumstances, this would have been impossible, but I was friends with two highly capable and patriotic young men who worked directly with Secretary of Defense James Mattis on a near daily basis. And this is a point for the debunkers, right? They argue that it's a small group of people. Like we see here, Chris Mellon talks with Jim Semivan, Luis Elizondo, and then gets him a meeting or tries to get a meeting with the Secretary of Defense, right? And he's able to do that through his connections. Chris continues, when that effort ultimately fell short, as you will see in the pages ahead, Lou faced a draconian choice, abandon his efforts to awaken a slumbering national security bureaucracy from within, or take the extreme step of resigning in protest to draw attention to these alarming intrusions. It was a fateful decision for Lou and his family. We discussed the options and had some heartfelt conversations as Lou weighed this momentous decision. We also discussed a plan I developed to get the issue before Congress and the American people in the event Lou resigned. So he did. Thankfully, Lou was not willing to sit quietly and ignore recurring violations of U.S. airspace by mysterious, unmarked aircraft. Once Lou made his fateful decision to resign in protest, We immediately launched a concerted effort to get him and this critical information about UAP to Congress, the press, and the American people. In the pages that follow, the reader will have the opportunity to follow Lou's UAP journey from the outset, many years before we first met in the Pentagon, to our fateful Pentagon and congressional meetings, then onward to the present day. It's a fascinating story, not only because of the profound and mysterious nature of UAP itself, but also because of the many colorful personalities involved. Definitely a lot of colorful personalities. Lou's personal hardships and sacrifices, and the insights and lessons learned regarding the Defense Department and the intelligence community. Thankfully, the truth has prevailed. It has. DoD and the IC now acknowledge that UAP are real and the phenomenon is global. This was always going to happen, right? At some point in the future, however many years down the future. Personally, I think within 3 years, we are going to know more truths than we know what to deal with. AI is going to give us so many answers that it's just going to knock down the door. And there's no way in our current connected world that this type of information is going to be able to be kept secret. If it is true and if it is real, the UAP phenomenon is really here. And it is, who knows, maybe something like extraterrestrials, some sort of non-human intelligence. We will find out, I think, within the next 3 years, no matter what the government does. Chris continues, military reports are pouring in. Over 1,000 since 2004 at last count. Serious investigations are underway. Even the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, once a bastion of UAP contempt, is now taking UAP seriously. I don't know if they take it that seriously, but he says here, this too is a direct result of our efforts. As NASA Director Bill Nelson was a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, at the time we arranged for Navy aviators to brief Senate Armed Services Committee members and staff. These briefings by Navy aviators were the seminal event that legitimized the UAP issue for Congress and later NASA. So this is the main event, right? Briefings by naval aviators to the Senate Armed Services Committee members and staff. That's really what kind of broke open the door. It was a seminal event that legitimized UAP for Congress and later NASA. He continues, in sum, nobody can deny that in the short period of time since Lou departed the Pentagon in protest and we approached Congress and the national media, the UAP issue has been transformed. Yes, I totally agree. Nobody can deny it has transformed. When I entered 3.5 years ago or 3 years ago into this discussion, everything was about Mick West. All you could see on TV was Mick West. It was debunker heaven, essentially. And now it's reversed, right? He's kind of gone by the wayside. And there's just been so many more channels, people, media actually willing to discuss this topic. Chris continues, today the topic is being covered by the mainstream press, championed by Congress, and adopted as a legitimate and important mission area by the Department of Defense, NASA, and the U.S. intelligence community. We are hopeful that, as a result, definitive answers regarding this great mystery will finally be forthcoming. We'll see. How did this turnaround occur after so many decades, at a time the UAP issue seemed hopelessly mired in controversy and conspiracy? What does our government really know about the UAP issue? Is it true unidentified aircraft are operating in restricted U.S. military airspace? If so, how concerned should we be? Nobody is in a better position to tell the story of the recent dramatic transformation of the UAP issue than Luis Elizondo, the author of this book. After reading this account, you'll be in a much better position to assess the questions above for yourself. You'll also be able to judge whether Lou is an example of the great man theory of history, namely a singular individual whose intrepid actions changed the course of history. In my view, absent Lou's persistence and courage, the U.S. government would still be denying the existence of UAP and failing to investigate a phenomenon that may well prove to be the greatest discovery in history. I find it heartening to see that as large and complex as American society has become, individual actions can still make all the difference. Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence and former Minority Staff Director of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So why he's so strong there, he knows the Secretary of Defense office, and he actually knows from Congress, right? Minority Staff Director of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So amazing forward there from Chris Mellon. Gives such insight. He's so eloquent. And I can't wait to finish this book from Luis Elizondo. Amazing stuff. Hopefully we see a change. Anything Elizondo does makes an impact. And I think this is just going to hopefully make a huge impact and push the mainstream to even cover this topic more. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. It really helps and it's free. Consider subscribing to get future notifications of when I release videos. And you might like this video. If you want to support the channel, join these great people over here, get exclusive bonus content, then click this button here. patreon.com/Chris Lato or become a YouTube member. If you want to continue the discussion, go to UAP Society Discord. Links are all in the description. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.